April 1945. Neustadt an der Aisch, Bavaria. The distant rumble of artillery made the young German woman's hands tremble as she stuffed family photographs into a small wooden box. "They're coming," her mother whispered, the words barely audible. For months, Nazi officials had described in graphic detail what American soldiers would do to German women. Hide anything valuable. Prepare yourself for the worst, the local Kreisleiter had instructed just yesterday before fleeing himself. Across German towns in the path of advancing Allied forces, approximately 7.3 million women and girls faced the terrifying prospect of foreign occupation. Many, like 19-year-old Elsa Hoffman, had spent sleepless nights rehearsing desperate phrases in broken English. "Please, don't hurt us. We have children. We are good people, not Nazis." Nazi propaganda had been relentless. Official party newspapers described American soldiers as mongrelized degenerates and Jewish-controlled rapists who had explicit orders to violate German women. Bulletins posted in Neustadt warned that Allied troops had been promised 3 days of freedom with the local female population. Official statistics claimed 187,000. German women had already been assaulted in territories under Allied control, a fabrication created by Goebbels's propaganda ministry to strengthen civilian resistance. That morning, as American tanks approached within 5 kilometers of Neustadt, Elsa and 17 other women crowded into the cellar of the local guest house. The oldest was 72, the youngest barely 14. They wore layers of shapeless clothing, smeared dirt on their faces, and cut their hair crudely short. Some older women wrapped bandages around their heads, pretending to have contagious infections. They brought bread, sausage, and water sufficient for 3 days, the presumed duration of the initial violence. At 11:47 a.m., according to the town church records, the first American Sherman tank entered the town square. The sound of boots on cobblestones filtered down to the cellar. Foreign voices called out in a language most recognized only from films. The cellar door opened at 2:23 p.m. What happened next contradicted every expectation. These women had been conditioned to anticipate. CT, young American lieutenant, accompanied by a German-speaking private, announced, "We're checking buildings for Wehrmacht soldiers. You're safe here. Please stay calm." When 86-pound Frau Weber collapsed from combined fear and malnourishment, the lieutenant immediately produced a chocolate ration and a canteen. Within an hour, a military doctor arrived to examine her. By nightfall, the cellar had been supplied with 14 wool blankets, 22 ration packs, and clean drinking water. An armed guard was posted, not to contain the women, but to protect them. The women of Neustadt were experiencing the first moments of what would become a systematic psychological reorientation. American occupation forces had received explicit orders regarding civilian treatment. Military Government Law 1612 prohibited fraternization with German women through gift or sale of food, clothing, or other supplies. Yet the same directives mandated humane treatment and basic provisions for civilians in occupied territories. These contradictory imperatives, maintain distance while providing humanitarian aid, would shape millions of interactions between American soldiers and German women in the months ahead. What began as fearful encounters would evolve in ways neither side anticipated into complex human connections that defied both Nazi predictions and Allied regulations. Among the 18 women in that Neustadt cellar, 16 would later provide testimony to Allied documentation teams. Their accounts, preserved in military archives, described that first evening in terms that directly contradicted the expectations of violence. "We waited for the worst," Elsa Hoffman later recounted. "Instead, an American boy who looked younger than my brother gave me a bar of chocolate and apologized for frightening us. I didn't know whether to eat it or cry, so I did both. The chocolate bar, a Hershey's ration that to Elsa tasted impossibly sweet after Years of wartime deprivation represented the first crack in a carefully constructed edifice of fear. What German women couldn't yet know was how thoroughly their expectations would be upended in the days ahead, and how these unexpected encounters would transform not only their immediate circumstances but their fundamental understanding of their former enemies. The machinery of German propaganda had worked with ruthless efficiency in the war's final months. Joseph Goebbels's Ministry of Public Enlightenment distributed 1.2 million copies of Schütze dich vor dem Feind, Protect Yourself from the Enemy, pamphlets specifically targeting women in potential occupation zones. These materials, printed on increasingly scarce paper stock, detailed supposed Allied atrocities with clinical precision. Government records show that by February 1945, 86% of German women surveyed believed sexual assault by Allied forces was inevitable upon defeat. Radio broadcasts intensified as American forces crossed the Rhine. Nightly programs recounted fabricated horrors allegedly perpetrated in recently captured territories. In Würzburg, officials organized mandatory viewings of doctored footage purporting to show French colonial troops assaulting German civilians. Wehrmacht deserters were publicly executed with signs reading, "I abandoned German women to the enemy," attached to their corpses, a final propaganda effort to strengthen resistance. In preparation, German women adopted desperate measures. Pharmacists reported depleted stocks of medications believed to induce temporary illness. Sales of scissors increased 400% in some areas as women cut their hair to appear less feminine. Mothers coached daughters on appearing physically repulsive. Stooped postures, shuffling gaits, unwashed faces. Tax records from March 1945 show a 78% decrease in cosmetics purchases in regions nearest to Allied advances. Civilian administrators documented women abandoning 53,000 residences in Western territories to hide in forests and rural areas. Meanwhile, Allied military governors prepared detailed civilian management protocols. Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, SHAVF, issued Directive JCS 1067 outlining occupation policy. Section 18(2)C explicitly prohibited giving comfort to or fraternizing with German nationals. Yet parallel medical corps directives mandated addressing civilian malnutrition, particularly among women and children. This tension between distance and humanitarian responsibility created a framework that would shape every interaction to come. American soldiers received contradictory instructions. Official orientation films warned against German seductresses, potentially harboring loyalty to the Nazi regime. Yet their field manuals contained specific guidelines for treating civilian distress with necessary humanity. British forces received similar guidance, documented in the Montgomery Memorandum of March 12, 1945, emphasizing that treatment of German civilians reflects upon the civilized nature of our cause. Colonel James Thompson, tasked with civilian affairs in the American zone, later testified that women represented the most complex challenge of occupation. We had to overcome propaganda on both sides. His May 1946 report stated, "Germans had been told we were monsters. Our men had been told all Germans were Nazis. The reality required immediate adaptation of policy. This adaptation would be tested in conditions of near-complete societal collapse." By April 1945, food rations in unoccupied German territories had fallen to 100 calories daily, less than half pre-war consumption. Medical supplies were exhausted. In areas where fighting continued, civilian women often went 72 to 96 hours without access to clean water. When occupation began, Allied surveys documented clinical malnutrition in 68% of adult women and 72% of children under 12. Gisela Müller, a 32-year-old widow from Heidelberg, recorded her family's final preoccupation meal in a diary preserved in the Baden-Württemberg State Archives. Dinner consisted of 3 potatoes, 1 spoonful of rendered fat, and hot water flavored with a single tea leaf used 6 times previously. We saved half for tomorrow, though we don't know if tomorrow will come. The next morning, as American troops secured Heidelberg with minimal resistance, Gisela waited with her 2 daughters in their apartment, doors barricaded with furniture. The first knock came at 10:17 a.m. She recorded the moment with trembling handwriting. "They are here. God protect us from what comes next." What actually followed would contradict every expectation Nazi officials had carefully cultivated, beginning a process of realization that would eventually leave thousands of German women weeping, not from the violence they had been conditioned to fear, but from the shocking discovery that compassion could exist even between recent enemies. First encounters between American soldiers and German women typically followed a similar pattern. Military government teams established contact within 24 to 48 hours of securing territories. In Frankfurt, records show that 13,200 civilian women received initial assessments from medical officers during the first week of occupation. These evaluations documented severe nutritional deficiencies, average body weight 23% below pre-war standards, widespread vitamin deficiencies, and critical protein malnutrition. The American response was immediate and systematic. Quartermaster records confirm that within 72 hours of securing major population centers, military authorities distributed emergency rations to civilian women and children. In Munich alone, 27 tons of K rations and C rations reached German households during the first week of May 1945. Each woman typically received daily provisions of 1,550 calories consisting of processed cheese, enriched crackers, powdered eggs, tinned meat, chocolate, and instant coffee. These rations, designed for combat troops, contained nutrients specifically lacking in late-war German diets. Medical assistance proved equally transformative. U.S. Army field hospitals treated 14,076 German female civilians during April-May 1945. Records from the 8th Evacuation Hospital documented treating women suffering from conditions ranging from advanced malnutrition to untreated infections. Captain Robert Williams, chief medical officer in Heidelberg, noted, "These women expected to be ignored at best, abused at worst. Their disbelief when receiving the same medications as our own personnel was often more difficult to manage than their physical conditions." The contrast with Soviet-occupied territories proved stark. While American forces implemented protective measures, eastern zones experienced widespread sexual violence. International Red Cross estimates from summer 1945 documented approximately 1.4 million cases of assault in Soviet-controlled regions compared to 487 reported incidents in American zones, a difference the German women quickly recognized. This stark disparity accelerated the psychological reorientation toward Western forces. Hildegard Knef, a 20-year-old from Berlin who fled to the American sector, later recalled, "We arrived expecting the worst from Americans, having been told they were violent gangsters. Instead, they established protected women's shelters with armed guards. The first morning, I received medical attention, clean water, and food rations. I thought it must be an elaborate deception before something terrible. When days passed and the care continued, I realized everything we had been told was a lie." The mechanics of assistance created thousands of similar moments of realization. American military authorities established 128 dedicated distribution centers for women and children across their occupation zone. By June 1945, these facilities provided not only food, but essential hygiene supplies, soap, sanitary materials, and basic medications that had been unavailable to German civilians for nearly 2 years. Cultural misunderstandings abounded during these interactions. Margaret Doss, who documented her experiences in a journal now preserved at the Nuremberg City Archives, described confusion when American soldiers offered chewing gum to German children. The children had never seen this strange substance. They attempted to eat it immediately, becoming distressed when soldiers pantomimed the chewing motion. Eventually, understanding dawned, followed by delight at this curious treat that lasted longer than any candy they remembered from before the war. Language barriers complicated these exchanges. Military government teams initially relied on 836 trained interpreters, far too few for effective communication. Consequently, initial interactions depended heavily on gesture, expression, and improvised communication. Emma Fischer from Stuttgart described receiving medical attention through a combination of pointing, pantomime, and simple words. This communication gap sometimes led to comical misunderstandings, but more often created moments of unexpected human connection that transcended linguistic boundaries. The sensory experience of these encounters made particularly lasting impressions. For women who had subsisted on turnips and ersatz coffee, American chocolate produced overwhelming sensations. Documented accounts frequently mention the impossible sweetness of Hershey bars and the shocking richness of powdered milk reconstituted with clean water. These taste experiences became powerful symbols of a reality that contradicted years of carefully constructed fear. By summer 1945, military government surveys documented a profound shift in German women's perceptions. Among those interviewed, 82% reported feeling safer than expected under American occupation, with 64% specifically citing food assistance and medical care as reasons for this changed outlook. This transformation, occurring across thousands of individual interactions, represented the beginning of a fundamental reassessment that would shape both personal relationships and international politics in the years ahead. The psychological transformation of German women under American occupation occurred gradually, through accumulated experiences that systematically dismantled years of indoctrination. By autumn 1945, occupation surveys documented a 76% decrease in reported anxiety among women in American-controlled territories compared to April measurements. This shift resulted from specific incidents that directly challenged fundamental assumptions about American intentions. Among these transformative moments, food distribution played a central role. When American authorities established the Women's Relief Program in July 1945, they created 276 dedicated distribution centers across the occupation zone. These facilities provided women with weekly rations averaging 9,800 calories, nearly double what late-war German civilian allocations had provided. Military records confirmed that these centers distributed 1,400 tons of food weekly to approximately 2.1 million. German women and their dependent children. By September 1945, Margaret Schaefer, whose detailed diary is preserved in the Bavarian State Archives, described her first encounter with the system. The American sergeant measured flour into my container, a full kilogram. I explained I had only one child, thinking he had mistaken me for someone with a larger family. He smiled and said, "This is the correct amount." I stood frozen, certain I had misunderstood his German. When I realized it was not a mistake, I turned away so he wouldn't see my tears. American fraternization policies evolved significantly during this period. Initially, General Eisenhower's directive of September 12, 1944, had established a strict non-fraternization policy with German civilians. Military police records show 3,760 American personnel received disciplinary action for unauthorized interactions with German women between April and June 1945. By July, however, recognition of humanitarian necessity prompted policy revisions. The modification to civilian interaction protocols, issued July 14, 1945, permitted necessary humanitarian engagement with German civilians while maintaining appropriate professional distance. British approaches differed slightly. Field Marshal Montgomery's civilian administration emphasized structured rehabilitation through formal programs rather than individual interactions. Their occupation zone established 184 women's service centers by October 1945, providing vocational training alongside nutritional support. Records from these centers document 78,100 and 142 German women receiving skills training in addition to weekly rations of approximately 2,200 calories per person. Medical initiatives revealed particularly stark contrasts with Nazi-era care. American Military Medical Corps established 32 dedicated women's clinics across their occupation zone by August 1945. These facilities provided comprehensive care previously unavailable to most German women. Records from the Frankfurt Women's Health Center document treating 14,276 patients between May and December 1945, with services ranging from basic checkups to specialized gynecological care. For women who had endured years of increasingly limited medical access, this attention represented a fundamental shift in their material circumstances. Children's experiences proved especially powerful in reshaping women's perceptions. American forces distributed approximately 27 million supplementary rations specifically formulated for undernourished children between May and December 1945. School feeding programs provided 1,800 daily calories to approximately 1.3 million German children by autumn. These programs often became the sites of profound emotional moments as mothers watched their chronically hungry children receive consistent nutrition for the first time in years. Elizabeth Weber, a schoolteacher in Munich, recorded in her October 1945 journal. The American lieutenant who oversees our school's food program noticed young Peter had outgrown his shoes. The next day, he arrived with 3 pairs of children's shoes. When I explained we had no means to pay for such luxury, he seemed genuinely confused and said simply, "They're not for sale. They're for children with no shoes." I had to leave the room to compose myself. Military documentation provides statistical evidence of these transformative interactions. Internal surveys conducted in November 1945 found that 84% of German women in American sectors reported significantly improved perceptions of occupation forces compared to their pre-surrender expectations. Among women receiving direct medical assistance, this figure reached 91%. These statistics reflected thousands of individual moments of realization that systematically dismantled years of carefully constructed propaganda. Martha Kuhler from Heidelberg wrote to her sister in December 1945, "Last week I became ill with pneumonia. An American doctor not only treated me, but arranged for additional food rations during my recovery. I suddenly remembered all the terrible things we were told to expect from these men, and found myself weeping uncontrollably, not from fear or pain, but from the crushing realization of how thoroughly we had been deceived about who these people are." By early 1946, American occupation authorities had formalized their approach to German civilian welfare through the creation of the Civilian Relief Administration. This organization, operating with a monthly budget of $42.7 million, implemented standardized support systems across the occupation zone. Statistical records document the scale of this effort. 1,240 distribution centers serving 7.8 million German civilians, with women and children representing 68% of recipients. Each center provided weekly rations averaging 2,200 calories daily per person, below American standards, but substantially above the starvation levels of late-war Germany. The material support provided through these programs transformed daily life for German women. Quartermaster records from March 1946 document monthly distribution of 4,700 tons of flour, 2,600 tons of preserved meat, 400 tons of powdered milk, 980 tons of fats, and 670 tons of sugar. These quantities, while modest by American standards, represented previously unimaginable abundance to women who had managed households through years of increasingly desperate shortages. Medical infrastructure expanded significantly during this period. The Women's Health Initiative, established in December 1945, operated 78 specialized clinics across the American zone. By April 1946, these facilities provided comprehensive care, including prenatal services, nutritional counseling, and preventive medicine. Health statistics from summer 1946 document measurable improvements. Average female body weight increased 14% compared to May 1945 measurements. Vitamin deficiency diagnoses decreased 72%, and maternal mortality rates declined from 24 per 1,000 births to 9 per 1,000, approaching pre-war standards. The psychological impact of these systemic supports extended beyond physical well-being. Denazification questionnaires administered by American authorities revealed a correlation between women receiving consistent assistance and those expressing rejection of Nazi ideological principles. Among women participating in relief programs for 6 months or longer, 84% expressed strong disagreement with statements supporting racial hierarchy, compared to 61% in the general female population. This transformation reflected not just gratitude, but a fundamental reevaluation of the political narratives that had shaped their worldview. Intercultural relationships developed, despite formal restrictions. While non-fraternization policies remained officially in place until October 1945, documented interactions between American personnel and German women increased substantially throughout 1946. Military government records show 18,473 registered relationships by December 1946, with approximately 3,500 marriages approved between American servicemen and German women during 1945-1946. These relationships represented personal connections that transcended both propaganda-induced fears and policy-based barriers. The transition from emergency assistance to Reconstruction created additional opportunities for perception change. The Women's Vocational Program, initiated in February 1946, enrolled 142,800 German women in skills training by year's end. These programs focused on sustainable economic participation, preparing women for administrative roles in emerging civilian governance, manufacturing positions in rehabilitated factories, and professional opportunities in health and education. For women who had expected exploitation, this investment in their future capabilities represented a profound contrast. Personal testimonies from this period reflect the emotional impact of these systematic supports. Helga Schmidt, whose letters are preserved in the Berlin Document Center, wrote to her sister in July 1946, "Yesterday, I received my certification as a medical assistant through the American training program. 2 years ago, we were told Americans would use German women as slaves. Now they have provided education that offers me a future I never imagined possible. I found myself standing in the sunshine, clutching my certificate, weeping like a child at the sheer impossibility of it all." Physical evidence of improved conditions appeared in medical documentation. Health surveys conducted in November 1946 showed average weight gain of 7.2 kilograms among adult women compared to initial occupation assessments. Childhood mortality rates decreased 63% between May 1945 and December 1946. Communicable disease incidence among women declined 58% during the same period. These measurable improvements reflected the comprehensive impact of systematic support, rather than merely symbolic gestures. Documented. Interviews with German women from this period consistently reference the contrast between expectation and reality. Interviews conducted by occupation authorities with 1,240 women in August 1946 found that 92% reported experiencing treatment better than expected from American forces, with 76% specifically citing material assistance as the primary factor changing their perception. When asked about pre-surrender fears, 88% acknowledged believing propaganda. Claims about American intentions toward German women, fears systematically dismantled. Through lived experience, the transformative impact of these programs went beyond individual women to shape community perspectives. Church attendance records from Protestant parishes in American sectors show average attendance increased 47% between summer 1945 and summer 1946, with women representing approximately 68% of congregants. Pastors' reports from this period frequently mentioned themes of gratitude for unexpected mercy appearing in prayer groups and community discussions. This spiritual dimension reflected the profound psychological reorientation occurring as German women reconciled their actual experiences with years of carefully constructed expectations. The long-term psychological impact of these experiences shaped a generation of German women who became unexpected bridges between former enemies. Longitudinal studies conducted by sociologist Elisabeth Noel Neumann between 1947 and 1957 documented this transformation. Among women who had received significant American assistance, 78% reported fundamentally altered perceptions of Americans compared to their wartime beliefs. These women, in turn, influenced their families and communities, creating ripple effects that extended far beyond individual experiences. Women who had initially hidden in cellars fearing assault became cultural interpreters between occupiers and occupied. By 1948, approximately 2,400 German women worked directly for American military government offices as translators, administrative staff, and community liaisons. Their fluency in both languages and cultures proved essential to Reconstruction efforts. More significantly, these women carried their transformed perceptions into German society, countering lingering propaganda effects through first-hand testimony about American humanitarian efforts. The statistical contrast between expectation and reality remained stark. Pre-surrender surveys conducted by Nazi authorities in March 1945 showed 91% of German women expected severe mistreatment under American occupation. By January 1947, occupation authorities surveys found that 84% of women in American sectors rated their treatment as fair or good. This 175-degree reversal represented one of history's most dramatic shifts in perception between recently warring populations. Individual legacies reveal the depth of this transformation. Among the original 18 women who hid in that Neustadt cellar, 16 provided detailed testimonies to American documentation teams. Their subsequent lives reflected the broader pattern of reconciliation. 2 married American servicemen and immigrated to the United States. 3 worked as translators for military government offices. 4 participated in exchange programs that brought them to America as cultural ambassadors. Their collective experience, from terror to tears of gratitude, encapsulated the journey of millions. Elsa Hoffman, whose trembling hands had once hidden family photographs in anticipation of violence, ultimately became a teacher in the reformed German educational system. Her 1978 memoir, Zwischen Angst und Dankbarkeit, Between Fear and Gratitude, preserved her recollections. I had been taught that Americans were barely human, mongrels without culture or restraint. The young lieutenant who first entered our cellar carrying chocolate rather than weapons didn't just contradict propaganda. He dismantled my entire understanding of reality. That realization brought me to tears then, and still does decades later when I recall it. International relations between Germany and America were profoundly influenced by these personal connections. When formal German government was re-established, women who had experienced occupation firsthand often supported closer alignment with Western powers. Polling data from 1949 showed that among women who had received direct American assistance, 86% favored Western alignment compared to 68% of the general population. This personal dimension of geopolitics helped facilitate Germany's integration into Western systems during the early Cold War period. Modern perspectives continue to acknowledge this legacy. In interviews conducted in 2005 for the Bavarian State Archives Oral History Project, elderly German women consistently identified these early occupation experiences as transformative. Emma Fisher, 81 at the time of her interview, recalled, "I was 16 when Americans arrived. Everything I'd been told prepared me to be treated as less than human. Instead, I received medical care, food, and eventually educational opportunity. That contradiction between what we expected and what occurred shaped my entire understanding of Americans and, ultimately, of human capacity for decency even after years of terrible conflict. April 1945, Neustadt. An der Aisch, the same cellar where women once hid in terror later became a community center with American support. The building still stands, now bearing a small plaque commemorating the transformation that occurred there, from hiding place to meeting place, from fear to cooperation. It serves as physical evidence of a psychological journey that began with the desperate plea, "Please don't hurt us," and evolved into one of history's most unexpected reconciliations. This reconciliation wasn't accomplished through grand diplomatic gestures, but through thousands of daily interactions where expected violence gave way to actual humanity. The story of German women and American occupiers remains powerful, precisely because it demonstrates how preconceptions collapsed when confronted with lived experience. These women who entered occupation expecting the worst discovered, instead, that humanity could transcend even the bitterest enmity. The tears shed by German women were not those they had been conditioned to expect. Not tears of violation and degradation, but tears of disbelief at finding compassion where propaganda had promised only cruelty. Their story reminds us that even after the most devastating conflicts, human connection retains the power to heal wounds that weapons create. In the unexpected kindness of recent enemies, they discovered not just relief from immediate suffering, but a pathway toward a shared future none had imagined possible.